Hello everyone, this is Dr. Catalana. The purpose of this presentation is to overview our materials on social and emotional development. One note, this will be a brief presentation because I'm expecting my EdCode 200 students to view the articles and videos that I have linked in your Blackboard. So this is meant as more of an overview so I can make sure that you are paying attention to the most important material. As you can see here, we've started with a presentation that has different images of some different faces. Remember from the beginning of this semester, we talked about that emotional keyboard, and students who are living in poverty are not always taught various different emotions. Remember that emotions are not always innate. It takes time to learn what it means to be passionate and frustrated, and oftentimes students who are living in poverty need guidance in terms of putting words to their emotions. So today I'm presenting two key theorists about social and emotional development. The first is Bronfenbrenner. So this is kind of our first important name for the day, and I'm going to go ahead and highlight that in red for you. And the second is Erikson. So those are your two key theorists, meaning as you're writing up your learner support report, I would expect to see one or both of those names. In terms of Bronfenbrenner, we will focus on the bioecological model of human development, and then for Erikson, we will focus on the 8 stages. Specifically within Bronfenbrenner, we will focus on these different components of the bioecological model of human development. So to show you where this might be able to fit into your learner support report, this is that chart that I've already shown you. So when we're discussing social emotional development, what are some specific social emotional challenges that you have seen? Remember, emotion takes up space in our brain, so that will also be impacting cognitive language development. So all of these go together, and it would be great to see you mention these two theorists in these sections on social and emotional development. Again, you should have already read and viewed the videos about this content, so I won't go into much detail. But one thing to emphasize in terms of Bronfenbrenner's model is the importance of context. So students are learning all in unique contexts. We do share the context of the classroom, but remember that all of your students will go home to different home environments. So it's important that you recognize that students are always interacting with their environments, and therefore your students will be interpreting material from different perspectives. This is a very throwback picture of yours truly, kind of showing you that in my childhood, I was the youngest, and so I was always observing my older brothers and sisters, and this had a great impact on my learning because I was exposed to a lot of opportunities, mainly because I was riding in the back seat, watching them go to various practices or do various different clubs at school, and this definitely had an impact on my learning. So you have seen this image before. I wanted to walk through it, mainly so it will not intimidate you as much. This is a fairly simple model, but I think the graphic can look a little intimidating. So basically what I want you to get from this is at the center of this model, we have the individual. So this is your single student. Think about your focus student in this case. We have issues such as health, their sexual identity, and their age. So at the center of the model, we have the individual. We then go out into the microsystem. This is where your student is most likely to be daily. So the family, the school, the neighborhood play area. The mesosystem is simply the interaction between the components of your microsystem. So, for example, the interaction between your family and your school peers. So, the PTA is a great example of that. Then we have our exosystem. The exosystem, of course, is going to be impacting the individual, but the exosystem is typically situations where the student will not be physically located every day. A great example of that would be like the parent's workplace. The student is not going into work with their parents every day, but that exosystem is impacting their daily life. And lastly, in this outside, we have the macro system. This is your largest system, and these are the attitudes and ideologies of the culture. I will very briefly walk through these different systems, but I wanted you to see how they interact. Something that is fairly new to Bronfenbrenner's model is that everything is placed into the context of time. So there's the chrono system. Think chronological, that's where that chrono system is coming from. So your individual student, your focus student, is not living in the 1600s. They're not living in the 1700s. They're living right now. And one thing to mention, this pandemic that we are all experiencing, this is part of everything, right? So it's not like the individual is alone in experiencing this pandemic. Actually, COVID-19 will go down in history. It will be part of this chronos system. So the COVID-19 pandemic is trickling down to impact your individual student. So again, just briefly, your microsystem, immediate relationships and activities, your family, your friends, your school, your teachers. This is so important for students living in poverty. Relationships are so important for all students. As we get further in our class, we will study observational learning, and students learn a lot within their microsystem because they are seeing how individuals interact with each other, and students are often tempted, naturally, just to copy what they see, right? So every person, every individual, all of your focus students will develop within a unique microsystem. My family is different than your family is different than your focus student family. Many of you mentioned in our discussion board concerns about your students' microsystem, meaning do they have a safe environment that is supportive? We do not know that. That's the difficult part about teaching. One thing that is encouraging that teachers in schools are part of the child's microsystem. However, we need to remember that also we don't know exactly where that student goes home. It could be positive, it could be more negative. So microsystem are immediate relationships. Your mesosystem is the interaction among your microsystem elements. This is a picture of a PTA meeting. So how does your family interact with your school? That will tell you a lot as the teacher. Parental involvement is going to make a big impact on the student's learning. And of course, there could be many reasons for lack of parental involvement, meaning potentially a distrust in schools. And often, what is most likely is parents are super supportive of their children, and therefore they are working several jobs and unable to be more involved in things such as the PTA. After the mesosystem, we have the exosystem. These are your social settings that affect the child, even if they are not directly there. So things like community resources, like I mentioned previously, your parents' workplace, the school environment, as in like the superintendent's office and leadership. The student is not directly visiting these places in a regular way, but every component of the exosystem is trickling down to the smaller components. Lastly, you have your macro system. Your macro system, larger society, widely, not wildly shared views. This is where culture, beliefs, customs, and law come in. So great example, this is a picture of a border fence, right? Especially for students living along the border. Think about how that kind of law, that kind of environment of keeping others out or keeping some in, how that would trickle down to impact their life. Think about scenarios such as 9/11. I have such distinct memories of when 9/11 occurred, and that was not something that I lived in New York. It's not like I was directly impacted, but it definitely trickled down to impact my environment at home. And lastly, your chronosystem. So all development occurs in and is influenced by the time period, right? So we have kind of an older time period here and then more up to date here. So really the key about Bronfenbrenner's model is that the individual is not isolated. The individual is impacted by the environment right around them, the interaction in that mesosystem between those environments, the exosystem, things like their parents' workplace, the legal services, and then macrosystem being on more of a national level. And of course, all of this is embedded with time. So your takeaway here is that your student is learning within context. So great example here with COVID-19, your students are impacted, some more directly than others, but every single person in the world right now is impacted by this virus. So we have to remember that we are learning in the context of a global pandemic, and that will definitely impact our overall knowledge of certain topics. So that's Bronfenbrenner. Again, I won't go into more detail because you should have explored those resources. I do want you to think very strategically about your focus student, particularly as you are working toward your learner support report. The last thing I want to mention is this idea of identity and self-concept. So how students identify themselves. We were able to touch on some of this within your field work, particularly when you had your students explain some of their goals and what motivates them. That's a really good hint as to where your student finds their identity. All of your students, depending upon how old they are, even myself, we are all looking for the answer of who are we, why are we here. That answer is so embedded in culture. For example, a large portion of my identity comes from my faith. That is embedded in my microsystem, right? So I spend time at church and with my church community quite often, so my identity is heavily based in that microsystem. Most importantly, all of your students will be interacting with their experiences differently. So the second model that you really need to focus on for this week is Erikson's model of psychosocial development. So I'm not going to go through all 8 of these because I gave you a good article that explains these differences. And also, one of my favorite resources is that video that shows the different stages in Disney and Pixar movies. So, what's your takeaway with Erikson? The takeaway here is that basically, as we are developing age-wise, we come up against various different psychosocial challenges. And the key here is that things could go really wrong or things could go really right. So let's take basic trust versus basic mistrust. This is your very first stage, according to Erikson. In basic trust, basic mistrust is going to go along with this question right here. Is the world a safe place? Will others meet my needs? Can I trust other people? So if you think about a student, very young, basic trust versus basic mistrust, one of the first ways that we communicate as humans is crying. So when I cry, can I trust that people will come take care of me? Or when I am put down for a nap, can I trust that someone's going to come take me when I wake up? If that child at a very young age learns that they can't really trust people, I want you to realize that that mistrust will trickle into the rest of their lives. You can hear my cat in the background. It will trickle into the rest of their lives, meaning they will struggle to trust other people. They may not trust that you as the teacher are on their side. They may not trust their peers, and therefore that can look like kind of isolating behavior. So each of these different stages, according to Erikson, will have an impact on your students' learning. So what I'd like you to do after you have reviewed the article on Erikson, make sure that you can match each of the stages with the main key question that is being addressed for your focus student. One note on Erikson, yes, he argues that these different stages occur chronologically. Something that I'm hoping you're seeing through all of our study on development is that we can't take all of these theories as 100% true in the sense of basic trust versus mistrust must happen before autonomy versus shame, and so on. Okay, so you are hearing my cat in the background who apparently does not have much trust in me, so I'm going to go take care of her. But just to kind of give you guys an overview back to our learning objectives, make sure that you can discuss the different components of Bronfenbrenner's model, and also make sure that you can discuss the stages of Erikson's psychosocial development. This would be a great opportunity to bring those theories into your learner support report. Thank you.